Brexit really is not going well. It is not going well at all. And the more and more it starts not to go well, the more and more the government will have to, well, effectively start to lie and start to, well, as we're about to get into, engage in some serious doublethink. And one of the theories I have had, and I will still push this theory until it's proven otherwise, is that at the end of this year, there is going to be some sort of mass celebration of, oh, look how successful Brexit was. And then next year, the government is going to start negotiating with Europe and start to, bit by bit, shall we say, put some meat on the bones of this skeleton of a Brexit deal that Johnson has negotiated. And partly that is because they want to appear strong. So they've had a year of going, grr, the evil EU, grr, shake your fist at them, clench your teeth, do, aren't we, standing up for ourselves, we're taking back all our, and we've said before, this doesn't make any sense. Johnson's deal never made any sense. May's, again, even if we had got Theresa May's deal in, still would have been a pretty terrible deal because we'd have still been out of the single market customs union. We'd still be seeing a lot of these potential problems. But we wouldn't be seeing, shall we say, things maybe kicking off in Northern Ireland. Maybe. But we'd have to see. Obviously, that's a completely different universe. But we knew from the Norway debacles that the government had said that it was not going to speak to the EU until 2022. So why has the government specifically said that? Well, because that's when it wants to, shall we say, start to maybe crawl its way back to the EU. It just has made, I think, the political calculation that it can maybe last a year on, shall we say, Johnson's bare bones deal. So, and on with this article and discussing, well, Brexit, doublespeak, and, well, 1984. So before we do jump into that, please remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And, of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And, as always, thank you very much for all those people who do support the channel that way. So, as always, this comes from the Yorkshire Bylines, the title of Brexit, Johnson, Doublethink, and the Spectre of 1984. I recently came across an article from the 2019 in The Atlantic magazine about George Orwell's 1984, linking it with what was happening at the time with Donald Trump's America. Staff writer George Packer used it to explain how doublethink has become very pervasive feature on both the left and the right in US modern politics. In 1949, novel described by Packer as a work of original genius and lasting greatness went well into the US Amazon bestseller list in the week of Donald Trump's inauguration, raising sales over 95-fold after the president's advisor, Kellyanne Conway, justified her false crowd statement using the Orwellian phrase alternative facts. Packer relies on many of his insights into the music critique of Dorian Leisker, author of The Ministry of Truth, a biography of George Orwell's 1984. Linsky himself says 1984 is the book we turn to when truth is mutilated, when language is distorted, when we see power is abused, when we want to know how bad things can get. It's still, in the words of Anthony Burgess, author of A Clockwork Orange, an apocalyptical codex of our worst fears. So what is doublethink? To be clear, we are not here talking about a common or garden lies. Any two-bob politician can manage that. What isn't is the cognitive dissonance. No, doublethink is something quite different. Orwell himself described it as reality control, to which the party managed its members by creating an alternative reality, presuming and using alternative facts when people's consciously suppressed information that challenge the new reality, even when it contradicts their own everyday experience. This is Orwell. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truths and to while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which cancel each other out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing them, both of them, to be logic and against logic. He also said that even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. And these are far more dangerous than cognitive dissonance. I can't say it, because it is, in quite fact, the reverse of it. In doublethink, there is no dissonance to be resolved, no contradictions to be reconciled. Everything just makes perfect sense. Packer puts this blocking out of reality even better. Self-censorship turns into self-deception until the recognition itself disappears. A lie you accept becomes a lie you forget. In a way, intelligent people do the work of emulating their own orthodoxy without the thought police. The best lies are the ones that have the most influence on your own behavior, and which you can almost be most convincing about to others. They are always, of course, the ones you believe yourself, which of all brings us to Brexit. Brexit was always contained a lot of doublethink. One might even go as far to saying that Brexit was such an irrational act that it could not have been imagined without even doublethink and a few alternative facts. Johnson himself has made a political career out of doublethink. His legacy will be the turning of it into a form of very oblique warning of a dystopian future, not an explicit instrument of government policy. If you may ponder why many of the clearly contradictory objectives of Brexit remain stubbornly entrenched in the public mind as quite rational, then you also might be quite interested in this again from Dorian Lancashire. Nor did Orwell foresee that the common man and woman would embrace doublethink as enthusiastically as the intellectuals, and without the need for terror or torture, would choose to believe that 2 plus 2 was whatever they wanted it to be. Remember, this is when speaking to a Brexit enthusiast. As to why, perhaps Packer again has the answer. Orwell thought that we needed a Ministry of Truth as a propaganda arm of the state to spread misinformation. But Packer says he didn't reckon with mobile phones and even social media. The web has become its own sort of global Ministry of Truth controlled by the Russians. The mass surveillance telescreens of 1984 are our own smartphones, by which we buy at the Apple Store and even carry everywhere. A few clicks and a lie can be sent cascading around the world in milliseconds. There is no need for coercion. We happily create and amplify our very own propaganda. The Ministry of Truth in this is Facebook and Twitter, as the rest says, Packers over Big Brother is ourselves. For examples of doublethink, could you do even worse than, of course, Chris Gray's own book, Brexit Unfounded, How No One Got What They Wanted and Why We're Never Going to, published, again, it's quite a good book, actually, which ruthlessly explains many of the contradictions of Brexit and the word that keeps popping into your head when reading it as doublethink. For example, taking back control apparently meant handing over to an unelected man like Cummings and Frost to do as they wished, virtually without limit. The second undemocratic referendum, which many Brexiteers argued for back in 2016, would be undemocratic and would somehow frustrate the British people's decision. To what? Think about it. Britain could somehow escape from the obligations of the single market while still be part of, quote, the free trade zone stretching from Iceland to Turkey to the Russian border. Erecting a significant non-tariff barriers to trade with our largest market should allow companies to do even more business with our European friends. That was again Boris Johnson back in December of 2020. Leaving the EU in order to cut excessive regulations has resulted in an explosion of red tape for our exporters. EU rules, and again, the democratic deficit of the EU 28 was an intolerable of a sovereign nation, but by joining and abiding by the rules of the 160-member World Trade Organization, with almost no democratic process or even effective legal redress, is perfectly fine. Likewise, Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which obliges the UK to commit military forces or even declare war. The UK must place sovereignty above economics to justify leaving the European Union. But Scotland would indeed be very foolish to leave the United Kingdom because they might be economically disadvantaged. The UK can adopt a different custom tariffs and be different food and product standards without a hard border with the EU on either land or sea, the so-called Irish trilemma. Signing a free trade agreement with Australia is forecast to increase our GDP by 0.02% over the next 15 years is hailed as a great victory. whilst at the same time exiting from the EU single market, a higher form of frictionless trade will decrease our GDP by about 4%, or about 200 times more, is also somehow a victory. The most recent example was George Freeman, the MP, on BBC's Newsnight, claiming that the UK was acting very fairly and continuing with free trade. It's Europe that's being very aggressive and immediately imposed all these extra checks, not us. That's right. Freeman sincerely seems to think that the EU has unreasonably imposed single market checks known as customs controls on the whole of the intolerant UK, which itself urged on by Mr. Freeman to exit the single market. Doublethink is indeed strong in this one. Of course, Orwell wasn't making forecasts when he wrote 1984. Rather, he was warning about the dangers of totalitarian regimes, particularly the Soviet Union, which perfected the art of doublethink. Bookended by 2 revolutions, none of this, by the way, is to suggest that we are living under a totalitarian regime, but we are certainly in danger of adopting some of its methods. The Russian Politburo demonstrated how a long-running police state can keep the illusion going when the party controls the press with titles like Pravda, of the Truth, and the official party newspaper pumping out the daily slurry of misinformation and disinformation and outright lies. The same sort of thing applies in the UK, except here it's the press controlling the organs of the state. Johnson himself admitting that his real boss, of course, is the Daily Telegraph, according to Dominic Cummings. Even in the recent police state, the delusion of prosperity and the widespread shortages of rows and shops that have all seemed to specialize in the sale of various kinds of shelving, if little else, cannot survive forever. So what happens when the doubt begins to creep in? The problem will be creating a new alternative realities, as there can only ever be illusions. The new ones cannot be killed off. Basic truths of human physiology, economics, and global trade inevitably persist and sooner or later come hammering on the door, as they are now with Brexit. Complaints about excessive red tape, the loss of freedom of movement, are turning into food shortages and increased prices. Johnson's gift was being able to convince the majority that Britain alone, fueled by boundless optimism, could defy all the old realities. Fortunately, his hero Winston Churchill said, "You can't fool all the people all the time." But the government, like the Soviet Politburo, will never concede that its entire political credo is a terrible mistake. In these circumstances, as doubt sets in, an external threat, real or imagined, becomes the political necessity to even deflect the rising anger. In 1984, Britain was turned into Airstrip 1. Part of Oceania was apparently engaged in a perpetual war, either with Eurasia or East Eurasia. The population can't be sure if it's true or not, since the party controls the news media, the helpful tool in that to justify the repression, the widespread deprivation, and of course the poor quality of food available to the proles. There is, of course, the zero prospect of a current conventional war, hot or cold, breaking out in Europe. But a trade and cultural diplomatic one will do just as well for Johnson and his vote leave government. It provides a convenient enemy into which the public ire can be channeled when it comes, and it almost certainly will. The Northern Ireland Protocol seems to have been drafted intentionally to provide a very ready-made source of conflict with the EU for decades to come, and Lord Frost can be relied on to keep the vitriol flowing. The issue, bound up with identity politics and the risk of return to violence, gives the government the ability to dial up the acrimony or even dial down according to the circumstances. You have been warned. The clocks are starting to strike 13. Do I think we're going to engage in some serious doublethink? I think the government will. I definitely think we are starting to see this denial of reality in what's happening. And we've always been very clear right from day one. Britain is a European country. It's part of Europe. It's not just an island sitting on the edge of the continent, isolated. It is in itself a country, and its closest trading partners and closest zone is Europe. And to foolishly cut ourselves off from the continent, indeed this market, will show, as it is now, just how foolish indeed this was. And these new trade deals are again foolish. Like I say, the Australian trade deal, 0.02% for over the next 15 years. That's nothing. And even the New Zealand one, even though the government's own statistics show that that advantage that we got from Australia might be wiped away because that potential trade deal with New Zealand could indeed shrink our economy. So I'm sure that's going to be loved when that becomes the next, quote, Brexit victory. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I will see you